Not sure if you heard about the the announcement today that an FBI agent suspected of lying about firing twice at LaVoie Finicum, and that may have gotten some help from 4 other agents in covering it up. I want to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I did hear about it. Things are kind of dark in that cell, but every once in a while I get a little bit of bits and pieces of something. And I did, and I think my response would be that it appears that their story is starting to unravel, that we have been very consistent with what we were doing, why we were there, what we were standing for, what our demonstration was about, and how we were there for peace, and that they continue to escalate force upon us until finally they ended up killing somebody. And then they tried to make their story, and now it's starting to unravel, and that's what happens when your story isn't solid.
The prosecutor did rule that the shooting was justified, saying LaVoie had reached for his gun in his pocket and so on. Your thoughts on that part of it?
Well, there is a lot that went on that still is not really out there, one thing that I keep pointing out is how LaVoie got out of the vehicle and he went away from the vehicle, and he did that to save the lives of those that were in the vehicle, because they were shooting at the truck, and he was drawing that fire away. And I am very certain and feel very strongly about him saving lives that day. So,
you have a hearing scheduled for tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
What are you expecting to come out of that?
Well, I can't talk too much about it because one is, it is a hearing, but I know that they're trying to put a gag order on me, so I can't speak, which again makes it very convenient for the government to cover things up. Our policy from the very beginning, and I don't know if you remember us saying this, was sunlight is the best disinfectant. That these things need to be brought out. They need to be reported upon. They need to be dug into. We need to see how our government is not abiding by the law and how that puts people in danger. Because government has rules too, and it's very important that we as a people hold our government to those rules. And so this gag order seems to be an effort for the government to be able to say, hey, look, we can say what we want to say, but Ammon and anybody on that side can't. And how convenient would that be?
It appears to be at least aimed at you mostly, the gag order. Would you not agree with that? I would say all the defendants, but they probably just want to keep you a little quiet. Would you agree?
I think it's the discovery they don't want, because obviously that's what is going to be exposed is, look, what is the real story here? And just the act itself in us going into the refuge. I mean, how it's being blown completely out of proportion. How we went in there to demonstrate. We did it peacefully. It's 30 miles out of town. We went in a time when no one was there to make a point that the government is breaking the law, not following the Constitution, that families and individuals, American individuals are being hurt because of government. And we were pointing that out. And so I think it's not just me, it's the discovery.
As you obviously sit here in jail now, you've been here quite a while, and LaVoie Finicum lost his life. Do you ever think maybe this whole thing hasn't been worth it?
No, I don't have any regrets. You don't go into something like this without believing what you're doing is right, and without believing that something needs to happen or something worse is going to happen. And that's where we're at. If we continue to allow the federal government to just do what they want and not be held by any of the bounds, what that history tells us that ultimately puts people in war. And I'm not saying anything to that effect. All I'm pointing out is that if people don't prevent actions, they escalate to the point where something really bad happens.
Anything you would have done differently?
I would have called my family more. But I have very few regrets. It's not easy, believe me.
Why would you have called your family more? What do you feel then?
Because I'm away from them now. I miss them dearly. I did this for them because I want my children to have freedom. I want them to grow up and to be able to prosper and to live the American dream. And so while I was able to communicate more with them, I would have loved to do that. But I do not regret what I did.
Are you able to talk with them now at all?
Yeah, but it's very difficult. There's lots of stringent rules, and of course everything's geared to benefit the prosecutors. So all the phone calls are recorded, everything's listened to, all my mail is opened and read, and everything is, giving the prosecutors advantage. Not that I communicate with my family for that, but there's a lot of friction in the system because of that.
You and I talked about your father a lot last time, and your dad, of course, is in jail now as well after coming to Oregon. Do you feel a sense of guilt about that? Perhaps if this didn't happen, he wouldn't be sitting in jail right now?
You know what? That's an interesting question, because I could see how people would think that might be, and I have pondered on that. However, I believe that eventually they were going to do it anyway, and so now is the best time for it to happen, because now we've got exposure, things are happening, people are watching, and so if they were to wait 3, 4, 5 years, which is exactly what they did with the Hammonds, they waited 5 days before the statutory of limitations ended, and then they arrested or prosecuted them or began that process. Because for 5 years, all that evidence, all the attention, everything was lost, and it was a strategic action on the U.S. government side. And so even though it is difficult, and even though he came to see us, and then they arrested him and surrounded him at the airport with who knows how many, almost a 70-year-old man being surrounded by 30, 40 FBI agents at the airport, I think this is the right time to take the fight on.
Do you feel public opinion kind of switching over momentum in your direction now, particularly in light of the news that came out with the FBI today and so on?
Well, remember, things are pretty dark in my little cell. This is what they give us to write with. It's like a noodle, and when this runs out, it takes me about 3 days to get a new one. So, and I there's not open communication back and forth. So, but I do believe that the truth will prevail, and I believe a lot of the propaganda moves really fast, and then the truth comes and slowly passes it up. What we're standing for is what most people in America really believe. They really believe that government does need to be limited. They really believe that the government has to have rules too, or it puts us as a people in danger. And we believe that the federal government's rules are very clear in the Constitution, and that the state has to keep the federal government in check. And they're two different governments, and the counties here too, but they're supposed to be check and balancing each other to make sure one doesn't abuse the people and the other doesn't abuse the people. And our states have not been doing that. They've been just letting the federal government come down into the states, and it's put the people in grave danger.
I remember last time we talked, and you had that book in your pocket as well. Tell me about that.
It's just the Constitution of the United States. It does have the Declaration of Independence. It has all the amendments and a few other things, but primarily that's what it is. It's the Constitution of the United States, and it is the constituted agreement between the states and the federal government. It's what gives the federal government power. It's what how the federal government was organized, and it's what the federal government must stay within, and they're not doing it. And that's why we have problems with our borders. That's why we have problems with our health care. That's why we have problems with our industries, because the federal government is coming in where the wealth is, and they're actually taking it and extracting it from the people and using it for their own benefit and growth. And we sit here and wonder why it's hard to put food on the table, why the dollar doesn't stretch like it used to, why we can't save. And it is literally because primarily our federal government has come into the states and taken the wealth.
As you're sitting in that dark room of yours here in the cell, do you ever think maybe this wasn't all worth it?
I of course have had thoughts of that, but when I start to go through everything that we did and everything we were standing for. And when I see reports that not only thousands are watching, but millions, and that I hear of people that were teaching of constitutional classes and were having a hard time filling a small room. Now they're filling gymnasiums with standing room only. And I have hundreds of letters coming to me, literally, that so many I can't respond back, that are saying, thank you for making a stand. Thank you for educating. I have to fall to the side that it was worth it.
How do you think history will record this years from now?
Oh, that's a really good question. I have no idea. I hope that history records it as of course we standing when there was a time that people needed to stand, that we stood peacefully in the right way, that we used our right to speech, our freedom of speech, our freedom to assemble, our freedom to redress our government, and also our freedom to bear arms. And that we did this in a proper way to bring exposure to something that is very important to all Americans.
What do you say to people? Because I know you hear from folks who say, well, maybe what you thought you were doing was morally right, but legally you had to know you weren't right at the time. What do you say to those folks?
Well, again, I would say that there's a legal and there's a lawful, and I don't want to I don't want to play on words, but lawfully we were very right. The Constitution makes it very clear that the Fish and Wildlife Service is not to own property inside the state and use it for a wildlife refuge. And so constitutionally, that facility and that whole refuge and all those ranches that were taken by the Fish and Wildlife Service, all of those were unlawfully taken. Now, when you go to codes and regulations, yeah, they say we broke a law, but then they had to stretch clear back into the Civil War law, back to impeding on a federal officer in order to even prosecute us. And so I find that very interesting, when really in reality, the most we probably should have been prosecuted for or charged with, is maybe trespassing on public property. And but no, they've made this huge big deal out of it, where they've indicted us in Nevada for over 80 years, mandatory. And so we could be looking at spending the rest of our lives in prison if the U.S. government gets its way.
When you think about that possibility, and you think about the kids that you have at home, you've got quite a few of them, what goes through your mind when you think about the possibility of a long-time jail sentence?
Well, one is, I believe the truth will prevail, okay? And the government has it so wrong of what happened. They've painted this picture in their minds of trying to piece this thing together, and they're so far off that it's actually going to be probably comical when the truth starts to unfold. Okay, so I want to believe that there's still justice in the system that will expose the truth, and then that will set us free. However, when I think of the possibility, it makes me very sad that I possibly would not be able to see my children grow and be with them. I have a 1-year-old son. I have a 5-year-old that just turned 5 yesterday. I missed her birthday. And I have a 7-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son that's going to be turning 10 here. I've got an 11-year-old son that's going to be turning 12 next month, and a 13-year-old daughter. So I have 6 children, 3 boys, 3 girls. But the thing about it is there's always been a need and a time for the fathers and the dads, primarily, the mothers too, to leave the field, if you will, and go fight, so that their families and their livelihoods and their pursuits of happiness and their families can be preserved, and their religion. And that's always happened. And they have to do that in order to preserve freedom and preserve liberty. And so that is what we did. And we unselfishly, at least I like to say that, and those people around me that helped, went to the aid of their neighbor who was being abused by government, and they risked their own their families, their livelihoods, their homes, and everything else to do it. But we're not the first to do it. Many, many, many good people in this country have done it for many, many years.
What's jail life like here for you?
It's very difficult. I'm typically, out a lot. I wake up early in the morning before the sun comes up, and I plan my days, and I try to, do the best I can with the time that's given me. And I'm not able to do that here. At times it gets pretty lonely. When the door closes behind me in the cell, it takes something away from you every time. But I do believe that justice will come. I do believe that there's a lot of things that I can do in here, and all of us can do in here that can be good. Reading books, learning, education, helping other people out that are in here. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of pain and suffering in here. Whether they did something wrong or did something right, they're still people, and they still have pains. They still have, thoughts and feelings. And those people need, we have to help each other out and do the best we can while we're in here.
When you're lying in your bed at night and the lights are all out, what's going through your mind?
Well, my family most of the time. I of course pray and ponder and just hope that our nation can make it, and hope that freedom will continue to be prevalent in this country. It's because it's not for sure, and it's taken for granted. History proves that freedom, if it's not taken care of and watched after, it will be lost. And we're seeing a lot of things in our nation and our governments and our society that have destroyed great nations before. And so I think about and pray that our nation will make it so that my children and my children's children can have the many freedoms and enjoyments and prosperity and happiness that I have enjoyed in my life.
At MFS Investment Management, we believe